So it's absolutely exciting to be here in London today. I seriously was just contacting Alistair because he hadn't put the date up for the event this evening, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I could attend. And Alistair said, hey, could you talk about the accessibility wars, which I'm actually quite thrilled to share. So Accessibility Wars is a white paper that Wilco Fears and I created. I'm some girl named Glenda. I'll introduce myself as the Good Witch. I work for a wonderful company by the name of DeQ. I'm the lead accessibility expert there. Does that mean I'm the smartest one there? No, it just means I'm the one responsible for making sure that we're quality and consistent and accurate. My accessibility mom is Sharon Rush at Nobility, and my accessibility dad is Dr. John Slayton, whose name you'll find on WCAG 2.0. So when I say I'm the accessibility love child of Dr. John Slayton and Sharon Rush, they really didn't have an affair. It's all just like a spiritual accessibility thing, right? I am on the Global Leadership Council for the IAAP, which is a new international association of accessibility professionals. And probably the most intellectually stimulating work that I do is volunteer with the W3C. With that said, I had invited Wilco, my co-author, to come speak, but he had an excuse. He just got married, honeymoon, whatever. I have the great luck of working with Wilco. He is a product manager at DeQ. You may know him because he's one of the heartbeats of Axe Core. And I listed him here under acknowledgements as though he were my co-speaker because he is half of these thought processes. What I'm about to share with you was actually reviewed by a number of people and people that think differently. So that as we're bringing you this white paper, we're not doing it in isolation. It's not Wilco and I sitting in a corner drinking scotch or whiskey or bourbon. We're actually trying to make sure that we're getting a complete viewpoint here. So what causes our interpretation differences, and is there a spectrum of accessibility? Or am I the only one experiencing this? So, do y'all think there's an accessibility interpretation problem? Okay, okay. So you've seen differences in how people interpret this thing called WCAG 2.0, which, if you're new to this field, WCAG 2.0 stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's an international standard published by the W3C, and it's the international measuring stick for accessibility. And it's supposed to be objective. Anybody here seen differences in an interpretation of a failure? Yeah, just a little bit, okay. So I'm trying to figure out why there's so many different interpretations. And for me, this is such a real problem because at DeQ, it's not just myself and another expert, it's 50 plus other experts. So it's almost like being at conference every day and having the debate over, is this a failure or is this not? Well, that can take a lot of time. So what's causing these differences? WCAG, if you read it, is complex. It is a huge piece if you read not only the standard but all the information, so there's a huge volume to it. It is technologically agnostic, so it can last. And I believe that our motivation for why we're using WCAG in a certain moment can change our interpretations. So these are some of the theories that we've been playing about. So for those of you in the room who have some accessibility testing experience, I'm going to have a hand raising here for, do you think the following thing is a WCAG 2.0 A or double A failure if you skip a heading level? I've got a page, good structure, but H1 to H3, there's no H2 in between it. Anybody thinks failure? Okay, I see some hands. How about layout tables? Are layout tables a failure? Okay, I want to tell you something. If you're just looking at WCAG fail or not fail and not looking at best practices, there is not a thing on the screen that's a failure, in Glenda the Good Witch's opinion. Now what would be really fun is to sit with Leonie and go, Leonie, do you agree? So I'm just gonna, for grins right now, ask her, Leonie, layout table on a page, failure or not of WCAG 2.0? You'd fail it?
I would, but then I'm the sort of person that will use WCAG as a starting point, not an end point.
Right, right. And so I'm talking about WCAG normative, not informative. So WCAG normative?
Yes, I would fail it under 1.3.1.
Okay, so we have to drink later. Layout tables. Layout tables, failure or not? Would you fail it?
Who, me?
Uh-huh.
Yes, I would.
Yeah, okay. I would not. Absolutely would not. And I'll bet €100 that I can change her mind. Now, will I change it tonight? Not necessarily, but that's how much I believe in what I'm about to tell you. But how ironic is it that two experts in the field that know WCAG backwards and forwards were in complete disagreement over an interpretation right now? There's something wrong. There's something wrong with our industry if that's true. So here's my belief. Does your role or perspective influence how you interpret this standard? As Wilco and I were looking at this and debating it with other people, we've seen some trends. This is not quantitatively supported, but programmers often look for validation errors. They're looking for syntax errors. Evangelists of accessibility are often looking for optimal solutions. We're not satisfied with just scraping by. A project manager trying to get a project to done is looking for a minimum viable product. They are not necessarily in alignment with the evangelist that wants the optimal solution. So if you have a different perspective, what's happening is we're getting inconsistencies in how we deliver our findings. One accessibility expert's going to tell you, this is an absolute failure, you must fix it. And another one's going to tell you, don't listen to them. You don't need to fail that. It's not okay to do that. We've got to solve this problem in our industry. It creates confusion, increased remediation, loss of goodwill. I've literally had a client say to me, if you call something that's not a true failure and I catch it, I'm gonna make you refund me money because I had to go spend resources to fix a problem that wasn't technically a problem. That person was not looking for optimal solutions. They were looking for minimum compliance. And I live in a country where there's a lot of lawsuits going on. So these causes of WCAG 2.0 interpretation differences, I discovered when I moved to DeQ in 2011 and was trying to get to the root of what was causing the majority of differences and arguments, wars of accessibility discussions. And it's these two words, normative versus informative, that became at least 50% of the problem or the difference that I was finding in interpretations. And most of us are self-educated when it comes to digital accessibility. And I told you my accessibility dad is Dr. John Slayton. Go look at the top of the WCAG document. His name's up there as one of the co-editors. How can a daughter of John Slayton, spiritually, not have known that, and I'm not going to be able to find my little pointer thing, so I'm just going to point way up there. There's a tiny little word under WCAG guidelines that says this section is normative. The first time I heard somebody tell me that word, normative, right there, I thought they were being snobby. I thought they were using that highfalutin language and trying to show me, you know, that I didn't know. That word's really important. Normative means required. The majority of the documents that you see at the W3C about WCAG are not required documents. It's mostly this one right over here, which if you can visually see the screen, is the guidelines and the success criteria themselves. That's the normative requirement. All these lovely little precious things over here, which are your understanding documents and your techniques, informative, not the requirement. Not the requirement. Most of my arguments that we were having were coming from somebody violating a technique or a sentence in informative. More than 50%. So, before you walked into this room, did normative mean anything to you? Okay. I really didn't know it. It's required for conformance. And I almost consider informative as chit-chat, never required for conformance. Now we're talking about a legal setting here. And I want you to just do a little mental thought pattern. To look on the screen, and I'll read it aloud as well, think about which of these really are the requirements versus which ones are informative. Not only the requirements, but also testable. Can you test a WCAG 2.0 principle objectively? Can you test a guideline objectively? A success criteria, the conformance section, the glossary, and the understanding and the techniques. Now I've given myself away a little bit because I mentioned it in a previous sentence. But now here on this slide, the parts that are normative required, objectively testable, are the success criteria themselves, also include the conformance section, also include the glossary. Those three things you can use as your defense for does it fail or not. Now, interpreting WCAG this way, WCAG is a very narrow thing. Interpreting it where we include the principles and the guidelines and the understanding and the techniques is the spirit of what it is. So if we're not deciding our motivations, we're going to have differences and we're going to be throwing ourselves into endless arguments and circles. In addition, I think we need to think about who is using the requirements and why. So this is all leading up to a spectrum, but how many roles did the W3C identify when they were looking at stakeholders for the accessibility guidelines? I was surprised because I was thinking the number of roles would be single digits. I didn't think that many different types of people were using them. They found and named 31 roles of people that use accessibility guidelines. This next slide is not meant to be read. It's just more for the impact of the 31 roles, which can be anywhere from a designer and a developer, government policy, QA specialist, project manager, each one of these pulling and having a different perspective and a different need. And the stakeholders boil down to 12 basic things that you do with the accessibility standards. You might consult on them if you're lucky. It's a great career. You might make a policy out of it, or use the policy, or make content, or teach it, or you may benefit from it yourself. So these roles and activities start to influence how we are going to interpret these guidelines. So what I did with Wilco is take a few roles and start to play this game of what happens when you look at WCAG from a research angle, or from a training angle, or a design, or a development, or a testing angle. And there's something really fascinating that happens down in testing. A difference between testing proactive, where the code is being tested by the developer before it's even left their station, their keyboard, versus reactive, we're already in production. Okay? So think about those roles and how, I have a graphic up here of a rope being pulled in multiple directions, and it's actually multiple ropes pulling in multiple directions, because I really believe there's tension against these. I've lived this tension. Where are those roles falling on an accessibility goal spectrum? Are any of those roles, are any of the people you ever work with, their goal for accessibility is none? Yeah, we run across those. Now, if you're in this room, your goal is probably not none unless you just came here for free pizza. How many times is it they're just becoming aware that they don't have a goal yet? They're just waking up to the fact that accessibility exists or is possible. Some compliance, kind of in that bargaining phase, like, well, I'll do a little bit, but I'm not going to go all the way over there. Minimum compliance, optimal, or ideal. And I really have a difference between optimal. Optimal is technically possible today. Ideal, I'm not satisfied with what's possible today. I'm going to invent a better future. Okay? So, I honestly, when I deal with clients, more than 50% of the time, the person that's paying the bill is coming at minimal compliance level. They want to pay for minimum compliance. Am I alone in that? Is that just, you know, am I a magnet for minimal compliance? Does anybody else that does this for a business in the room feel differently, that they're getting other kinds on a more than 50% basis?
Yeah.
Where do you work?
Work for big inclusion. We have just a variety of clients, and some of them just want the best that they can achieve. Yeah,
I've got them, but they're not over 50% of what's walking through my door.
I'm lucky.
Yeah, you are. You are. So I want to talk to that man over there. All right, I'll see what's going on. So let's just play a little game. An accessibility researcher, where do you think they're going to go on a goal spectrum most of the time? Going to be on the optimal or ideal end? How about a trainer, a teacher that's teaching accessibility? Where are they going to be? Okay. What's fascinating that I'm seeing over and over again, my trainers want to be in optimal and ideal. They want to invent the future. And I have to remind them that anytime they go in this area, they got to be crystal clear if the client is only looking for minimum. I don't mind them teaching it. I want them to teach it. But we have to be empathetic with there's not endless budget all the time. So it's an interesting thought process of who goes where. And here's what came out of that. I have a chart that has the accessibility spectrum on it from none, aware, some compliance, minimum compliance, optimal to ideal. And then I've put some bars. And here's what I want to say. A person that is qualified to test for accessibility is going to be somewhere in this range of minimum all the way up to ideal. And there's some subtle shading in here. I actually think they're closer to minimum compliance in many cases that I'm seeing in the business world. Not all of them, so they can span all the way. Developers and designers, I really think it depends on what project they're on and how much training they have. Trainers, I think, are very much in alignment with optimal. How hard is it to teach and not teach the best? You don't want to just teach getting by. And researchers are pushing towards that ideal. Does this resonate with what you guys have experienced, or are things just odd in the United States? Okay, I know things are odd in the United States. In the field of accessibility, does this resonate with you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of it is driven by budget holders who are probably further edge than that.
Yeah, yeah. That's very, I think that it comes down to that, and we'll get disagreements between the person that's writing the check for the cost and the person doing the work. There'll be disagreement in there for sure, even within a company. So Wilco said to me, thank goodness, over tequila and tacos, that we needed to write a white paper on an interpretation model. And in the end, the purpose of this is really an accessibility peace model so that we don't waste precious time fighting about what is or is not a failure, because there aren't enough hours in the day to get this done in the first place, and there aren't enough experts in the field. So let's use our time really wisely. And this is what Wilco said to me. And if you know anything about me, this was a really hard sentence for me to hear. He said, it's a good thing I love him, there's no correct interpretation of WCAG 2.0. The international standard for measuring accessibility does not have a yes or no answer. And I looked at him. It was at the end of CSUN. We're at the taco stand right next to the hotel. I did have tequila. And he said, I really think why you test influences how you test. And I said, sure, but there's a right or wrong answer. After we finished writing our white paper together and many discussions, our model came out to this. There are at least 3 points. Minimal. That's where I've been explaining to you about the normative. Content is only non-compliant if it fails normative text of WCAG. Dead men. Really not the spirit, dead men. However, WCAG's so well written that if you go to dead men, you make a lot of progress. Optimized, which I'm still not sure this is the right word for the center one. This is where I think most accessibility experts want to be, and that is interpretations are based on the intent of the success criteria, and we're looking at all the information provided by the W3C, both informative and normative. And then there's that idealized at the very top. We're not satisfied with where it is today. We're going to push it higher. And I absolutely agree with Wilco. All 3 of those interpretations are valid interpretations, but it's not okay for me as an accessibility expert to force my preferred choice of interpretation on a client who wants a different level. I truly, truly believe that. And so minimal meets requirements. Wilco calls it WCAG Diet Light, extra light. And is this okay as an interpretation level? Or does it disgust you to the point that you wouldn't want to do it? If it comes to a firm that's in a legal, urgent battle, where they're just trying to get out of hot water, limited resources, it's a logical business decision at that point. And my opinion is this: I'll take you at your dead men preference, and I'll turn you in to a person that cares, but not by forcing it. I'm gonna want you to want it, not because I forced it or snuck it in under the table. An asset that's close to the end of life may fall in that category as well. So legal officers, monitoring agencies, people with high urgencies, this optimized, sustainable universal design, this is where we want to be. We don't just want to do the minimum, because the minimum of WCAG is something that people had to agree on with consensus. You ever try to get consensus amongst 12 people on your team? Imagine it across 150, including organizations like Google and Microsoft. This is not easy. So WCAG Min is based on consensus. But optimize this middle level, WCAG normative plus best practice, balanced and teachable. And I think that as I see people go to optimized, that I need to encourage this first bullet, which is pragmatic. If you care about accessibility, you've got to make sure that what you're asking people to do is reasonable and not going to break the bank. It's something they can actually do and that there's a good return on investment. So it includes both the normative and the informative and a smart business mind. I believe this should be the default interpretation. It's the one I encourage. But if a client comes to me and says, I'm going to charge you, Glenda Sims, for everything that you give me that's a best practice that's not a full failure of normative, I'm going to back down. Even if they don't say they're going to charge me, because I'm going to give them at least the base if that's what they came to me for. So product teams and QA testers and some trainers, if not all trainers, I think should teach optimized. We shouldn't just teach the low. We should teach the best. And the idealized, I want you to catch yourself and ask yourself, when you're asking for something in accessibility, if you were the business owner trying to balance all the other needs, would you really be able to afford what you're asking yourself to do? If we're at the grocery store and you only have $100 to spend this week, but you've got $200 worth of groceries on the conveyor belt, you're gonna have to put half of it back. Think about it. Don't just push on things that aren't required. But in this idealized world, pushing the boundaries works with all assistive technology, very time consuming to go into this idealized world. Susanna Lauren of Funka is brilliant at thinking in idealized and in achieving idealized. And I love her for that. I do. Apple, absolutely incredibly good at that. When I started in this business, there was one major screen reader. It was JAWS. It didn't exist on a Mac. No screen reader existed on a Mac. And I couldn't imagine how a touch screen could ever be accessible. PDFs weren't accessible. Flash wasn't accessible. I'm old. if it weren't for idealized, if it weren't for people saying this isn't good enough, then these things wouldn't happen. So I absolutely think there's a place for this to go further. And interestingly enough, while I'm here talking about how the interpretation model is important, and interpretation at minimum is something your clients have a right to ask for, or your business, or your project manager, that I have volunteered to be on the Cognitive Accessibility Task Force. When I'm on the Cognitive Accessibility Task Force, do you think I'm thinking about minimum or optimized? Or am I actually thinking we don't do a tenth of what we need to do for people with cognitive disabilities? So I don't want you to think I'm cold and heartless. I'm not. I'm just making sure that we don't waste valuable energy arguing with each other when we really need to admit, oh, I'm coming at this from this angle, you're coming at it from that angle. Let's decide that first before we argue for a year over whether headings can be skipped or layout tables are a failure. So, why would you go into idealized? You want to be a leader. You want to win a competition. You want to change the world. So evangelists and pattern library authors, go there. Accessibility trend centers, do it. Make a difference. Now, I'm going to stop for questions and ask, does this model make any sense to you? What questions do you have for me? Yep.
Let's take my question. Just one.
You get your exercise tonight, Alistair.
So, is this on? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Is it on?
I'll repeat your question.
Oh, is it not?
Is there a switch?
Can you,
I think it's on now.
it's on, cool.
Okay. So my question was about maybe culture. And maybe do you think there's different parts of the world which will have different emphasis on the type of testing that they'll employ, sorry, not the test and the interpretation that they'll have? Do you think that might be a factor in all of this?
I definitely think there is going to be a culture, but I would say not based necessarily on country, but on individual company or project team and their state of accessibility maturity. There might be some extra value in the place that you're in if there's a good community around it, or if it's actually something that people think is required. So, but I tend to think of that as more individual. That's my take on it.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions? Oh. Can you pass it behind Jess?
Hey, Glenda.
Hey.
One of the things I think you talk really well about, the pragmatism element of it, and how different people need to be at different levels because of what's going on in their environment. That's really, really important. But I think sometimes it's not money, it's time that's the scarcest asset, because if you look at just money, actually idealised will make money, but longer term.
Yeah, yeah.
The optimised will make money mid-term, and the minimum is about surviving today. So I don't know that it's about money. Is there a split between money here and time as the scarce resource? I guess is the question.
I think that's a really excellent insight. I appreciate it so much, Christine. And when I think money, I think in my head, I automatically think resources, because my background, 25 years in EDU and .org, I really wasn't in a money space. I was in a more of a time space, and you have to pick what you work on. And there have been some occasions where I've watched an executive struggle with what they're going to do, and you see a security risk come in that would literally keep me awake for weeks. And they're the head of chief information officer, and a horrible security has occurred. And they're like, I have to solve that. So it is very, very true. And there is some money and some benefit in doing all of these things. Universal design makes for better design, without a doubt. Yeah, really good point.
I'll switch it and then to Marco afterwards.
Hi, Glenda. Do you think we'll get to the stage where there is a normative WCAG version that everyone can agree on? And which version number do you think that might be?
So I don't think we're ever going to have one that's so clear-cut. And the reason why is it's technology agnostic, and it has to be internationalized. And so that normative language, it's my belief that it's really going to be hard to craft that, but that is the hope for silver. So we have WCAG 2.0 is out. WCAG 2.1 came out in June of this year, which is an addition of 12 at the A&AA level new requirements. And we don't know exactly when silver is going to come out, but I think of it as Accessibility Guidelines 3.0. Don't quote me on that. That's just to give you a model of where it's coming. That's the hope for that. And I am hopeful. There's some brilliant people working on that. So I'll be optimistic, and I'm going to say silver.
Hey, Glenda, thanks for this. This is really great. Last year, I was working on a project as an advisor where we had this tension of the actual university that wanted a new website. They wanted to shoot for the optimal.
Right.
And they brought in an external agency which claimed they had accessibility experience, but after a third of the project, it became very apparent that they weren't, that they had overstated their competence.
Yeah.
So we were a team of two who were doing the WCAG evaluation. We actually had to balance, okay, the client wants optimal, but with this company, with this agency, we can shoot for like a what I call dead man plus. So we basically had to be at some points be very pragmatic. Okay, this actually fulfills the normative criteria.
Yeah.
And it is usable by the two major browser screen reader combinations. Yeah. But it isn't really pretty. It turned out quite well in the end, and the client was satisfied. When I look at the website today, there are still so many areas where I think, this is really, why couldn't we have done better? But we couldn't have done better with that agency. So this was really a matter of time, because they wanted to come out with a new website by the beginning of this year. So they actually had to. So
time is another. You've got time. Yes. You've got the resource bandwidth of the humans themselves. You've got their ability, and then you've got the goals of the person with the decision of how to spend all those resources. And I love that example was the money holder, the decision maker, actually wanted optimal, but then there were things in the mix of the resources knowledge that led you to only minimal with a little plus. Yeah. So that's fascinating. That's fascinating. I wanted to tell you, as we have probably time for a few more questions, that this paper is online. We made a really easy bit.ly link for it, so it's bit.ly/A11y piece. Because while I call it the Accessibility Wars, our intent is to really create peace and positive energy. And I must say that my job at DQ, I'm Yoda on the Jedi Council, the Accessibility Jedi Council. And the debates that go on are exhausting. They're good debates. I'm glad they're asking the questions, but we need to find a way for all of us to find these answers quicker and not end up in endless debates. So do we have time for questions, or is it time for a break?
So possibly a couple of quick questions. So I've got one really quick question for you.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the French government has something called RGAA? Which is...
I haven't read it in detail.
So it is based on WCAG, but it's a subjective interpretation of it. So I'll share that with you. That they've tried to solve it.
They've tried to solve it.
By removing the ambiguity.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Fascinating. I will look at that. I would prefer that we only have one standard around the world, because I think Tim Berners-Lee meant for it to be worldwide, but that was cool. That would be cool to look at, and maybe Silver should consider it as well.
Hi, Glenda.
Hi.
I would like to know, in your WCAG, did you mention about anything about the pull cord emergency alarm system by law? Because recently there's a big organization, and I pulled the cord, and it wasn't working.
And it wasn't working?
No.
Yeah.
And it's not, it one time happened.
Yeah.
So I would like to suggest, like, if you can add in your book, like every organization, every Friday, Tuesday,
have a
they
test
do
for that.
fire test alarm. Why they don't do test?
That's a really good point. And what I would say is, in my country, that would be the Americans with Disability Act that would have that piece.
Yeah.
And something like that that's in physical space wouldn't be in this spec, but that doesn't mean that we would have it over in the physical spec, which for us is the Americans with Disability Act. And I would have to ask the Europeans where that kind of
Equality Act in the UK.
Yeah, something physical.
Yeah. Because in UK, in my experience, because I have a disability all my life, and as you said, like a tester, I'm a tester.
Yes, you are. You are the reality test.
But I'm the tester. But here, I had many times I have to face, no, we are the expert. I say, you are not. You are, because you got a degree. I have a lifetime experience. So in UK, there is no one checking is disabled, is pull cord alarm. Even I can challenge all the big organizations in UK. I can name it.
In America, you know what we'd do? We'd send complaint letters en masse. We're a litigious society, but I would like to talk to you during the break.
Thank you.
About this, because I do want to hear what you say and see if there's any way we could get that information to the right people.
We need to break now, but can I say a massive, massive thank you to Glenda.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I want to say one thing. Wilco was not able to be here, but DeQ has an opportunity for an AXE senior JavaScript developer. If you want to join the AXE team, Wilco Fears at deq.com, and I have an image on screen. You have my sword and my bow and my axe. So thank you, Alistair.
Awesome. So if there are drinks, possibly, I'm not sure if there's any food left, but if you want to make your way next door, have a good chat, and if you can be back here, we will be starting the next talk at 8:15. Thank you very much.